We're going to break down my boy, the big dog, the Geonosian Starfighter in today's Star Wars video, but before we do, I do have a message from our good friends over at Vite Ramen. Are you an isolationist bug colony trying to defend your world from the outside scary space? Well, Vite Ramen might not be for you. I'm sure there's some queen milk for you to suckle on, but if you're an ordinary person watching this video, you might want to consider Vite Ramen. I love working with Vite Ramen. They've helped my channel out through hard times, through good times, and they're just a great company. Aside from having an awesome product, they treat their employees really well, and it feels good to work and buy from them. Vite Ramen makes high quality premium ramen. It's healthy, it's tasty, and especially if you're trying to, be a little better in the new year, it's probably better than ordering out. Vite Ramen has partnered with me to make my Massaman curry flavor. No, it's not restocked yet, very soon. But they also have a ton of other really cool offerings, and if you're interested in checking those out, make sure you check the link down in the description. Use code Eckhart, you'll get 10% off your purchase, and let me know if you've tried it. Do you like it? And never delete comments. I don't have to, especially when talking about Vite Ramen, because everyone enjoys it. But let's get on with it. Growing up, and this is kind of weird to say, Return of the Jedi and Attack of the Clones had a very similar place in my heart. Return of the Jedi has always been one of my favorite Star Wars movies. Attack of the Clones, not quite. What's similar, however, is that both are capped off with really interesting battles, and when watching the movies, which I did a lot, I would frequently fast forward to the parts that I liked. Well, I felt like I knew the Battle of Endor like the back of my hand. I can't quite say the same for the Battle of Geonosis. Well, one thing I always found interesting was what we called the Geonosian Starfighter. Now, the official name for the ship is the Nantex class Starfighter. People who've played Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes and have a Geos fleet are probably familiar with them, but I always found them interesting because they're so different than most Star Wars ships. For one, they lack the sort of real-world groundedness that something like an X-Wing has. Like, okay, it's got wings despite it being a spaceship. It's got, a fuselage, pretty standard thing. The Nantex, the first time you see it, is this what looks like super maneuverable craft, and I found that really interesting. I wasn't sure when I watched the movie the first time whether it was simply a speeder that could operate in atmosphere like an airplane or a spaceship. Of course, it turns out that yes, the Nantex can operate in space, although we don't see it, for example, in Revenge of the Sith. I also found it interesting because it's so similar to Dooku's solar sail ship, almost like the TIE fighters to a TIE Advanced. One thing that's nice is that there's actually been quite a bit written about the Geonosian Starfighter, from the incredible cross-sections, which gives a detailed look at how the ship actually works, to the new Essential Guide to Starships, which provides a nice high-level overview. Somewhat interestingly, we see the Geonosian Starfighter covered pretty comprehensively in 2 issues of Star Wars Fact File 64 and 70, and what really stuck out to me when reviewing those sources is how similar in a way the Geonosian Starfighter is to, say, a design of the Mon Calamari. Let's talk about why. First of all, as we'll get to later, Geonosian Starfighters were custom designed for the Geonosian species, and that's really an essential part of what makes them so great. The Starfighter was also in a way fish-like, although unlike, say, an undersea Leviathan like a Mon Calamari cruiser, the Geonosian Starfighter combined the look of a sea-like mollusk with the fast darting motion of a small fish. Finally, the ships were as much a piece of art as a mechanical creation. Fact file number 70 says specifically that the Geonosian Starfighter was made out of a material known as lamina steel. Most starfighters were made primarily of other elements, but the Geonosians made their starfighters by hand, literally weaving the metal into very resilient plates. That means that each starfighter was itself somewhat unique, with, and again this is according to fact file number 70, idiosyncrasies being very common, and with fighters often varying in exact length, depth, or height. But what was the role of the Geonosian Starfighter? What did it do, and was it effective? We can answer that last question quite easily. Yes, it was very effective, and this was largely due to the unique craftsmanship of the ship and just its overall quality. Interestingly, Geonosian Starfighters were never intended to be aggressive craft. The Geonosians wanted to be left alone. So much for that, I guess. Jesus. The vessel was a really unique combination of pure speed and agility, and I think that's well represented with its design. This is explained in the cross-sections book for Attack of the Clones, which says these fighter craft combine high linear acceleration with phenomenal maneuverability as a result of the frictionless rotating mount of their thrusters. Also kind of reminds me of what we see of Ventress's craft in the Clone Wars. But while the craft's shape was important, the technology and even the pilot used within was also cutting edge as well. As alluded to earlier, the craft used unique rotating engines. Those, alongside the gun turret, were actually magnetically suspended, not only helping apparently with efficiency, but also meaning that bits of the ship could easily be swapped out, which is not something you hear about quite frequently. People often talk about the rotating engine and how that allowed the ship to pull off some really unique moves, but the actual laser itself could also be guided by a series of magnets, which, alongside the sort of vectored thrust of the Geonosian Starfighter, allowed for it to be incredibly deadly in dogfights. The ship can literally fire to either side in almost a 270-degree angle. When it was firing straight ahead through what's sometimes called the beak of the ship, the laser could be further guided and manipulated by over 100 small tractor beam projectors, giving the ship just an incredible degree of accuracy. Making this all more deadly is, according to the new Essential Guide to Vehicles, almost a quasi-stealth ability of the ship. Visually, Geonosian Starfighters gave off very little ambient light, so it could operate well in places like the asteroid field around Geonosis. Obviously, given the Geonosian Starfighter was meant primarily as a planetary defense craft, it's not surprising that its color naturally matched the sands of a home world. The final thing that made Geonosian Starfighter so deadly was the pilot within. And this is something every source mentions. The Geonosians were well known for their hive civilizations, which used a rigid caste system. There was a caste specifically dedicated for the pilots of the Geonosian Starfighter. Almost like a Jedi in the Force, or perhaps more accurately, an R2 unit with a starship, Geonosians would be paired with a starfighter and its computer and would develop a link with it. But that might be putting it too lightly. According to Star Wars Fact File 70, and I quote, "The ship's computers weren't just their best friends, they were their only friends, their only family. Their symbiotic link was reinforced by the design of the cockpits, which used scent simulators and pheromone sprays to convey information directly to the pilots faster and more reliably than audio signals." So what happened to the Geonosians and their wonderful fighters? Well, we do know they saw action, despite their original purpose, outside Geonosis itself, but after the Clone Wars, the ship really didn't show up very often. In Star Wars canon, the Geonosians were killed en masse by the Empire. In Legends, they did suffer in the Imperial period, but also mostly kept to themselves. The Geonosian Starfighters, for obvious reasons, i.e. being so heavily morphed for Geonosian physiology, didn't see much use outside of the Clone Wars, but I think it was a mistake for shipbuilders and other factions not to employ key lessons. For example, I really like the idea of the magnetically suspended turret and engine. I mean, at least within Star Wars universe, where science doesn't really exist or make sense, as well as I like the idea of the tractor beams, the small projectors, helping to guide lasers. You can see how the Geonosian Starfighter, which can both move and shoot in a different but very accurate way compared to other ships of its era, would be highly dangerous. For me, it's definitely a ship that feels somewhat underused. I would have liked to see not only more of the Geonosian Starfighters in the Clone Wars, but also maybe some variants, a bomber. I can imagine sort of a ship with more prongs and more weapons, but those are just my thoughts. What do you think of the Geonosian Starfighter? Do you like the design? Is it boring? I look forward to reading all of your questions down below. Until next time, guys, be safe, have a good one. May the Force be with you.